Okay. Moment. Okay. There we are. Okay. So it's possible to explain the dimension of the luminary soul that is revealed when a Jew feels crushed, and the very fact is in exile reflects a higher level in the dimension of the luminary of the soul that is revealed through Mesiras Nefesh. This concept can be clarified by prefacing with a further explanation of the superiority of the Jews' acceptance of the Torah at the time of Purim over their acceptance of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Among the explanations given for the fact the giving of the Torah is considered merely the beginning of the process, and while the acceptance of the Torah, Kabbalah, the true acceptance, the complete acceptance, wasn't the time of Hashverosh. So the basic reason is as follows: Torah. The reason the Jews accepted the Torah at Mount Sinai, declaring we'll do and we'll listen, is because it was, to borrow an expression from the same, Hashem hung a mountain over their heads like a tub. So the standard midrashic explanation, this medrash, is that the Jewish people were ready to accept the Torah, but then when they saw the awe-inspiring presence of God at Mount Sinai, they backed out. It was too much for them. So Hashem said, no, you already signed the deal. And he hung the mountain over their head like a tub and said, look, either you'll accept the Torah, here you'll be buried. So the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe, interprets our sages and taiments in a non-literal manner, explaining the spiritual revelations above were so powerful, the Jews had no other choice to accept the Torah, which is actually more in line with the Midrash about Naaseh and Ishma. The Jews first said, we'll do, we'll listen. In other words, it's not that they wanted to back out, but rather that the mountain encompassed them like a barrel, not like an anvil, by the way. The idea they were so encompassed with this incredible revelation that they had no choice but to accept it. It's like everything was obvious. It's like when a soul goes to the next world. So the Jews willingly accepted the Torah, committing themselves with all their hearts. Even so, this act is considered as forced because it was a natural and unavoidable response to the love being forth from above. Hence, as a mountain was held over their heads. And it's not just a matter of the love. Everything was so obvious. It's like the truth was so obvious because they were completely lifted up out of the normal situation in which the world is an obstacle and a concealment to godliness, that they had no choice. It was obvious, like I say, when the soul goes to the next world. In the time of Achshverosh, by contrast, the Jews accepted the Torah of their own volition, just the opposite. Staying Jewish meant death. And in spite of that, they accepted the Torah. They accepted to be Jews and to follow the Torah, that they could have abandoned Judaism. So here they had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and they still accepted the truth because it was the truth, no matter what. So that is the basic explanation of what happened at the time of Achashverosh. But there's really two levels to this. One is where they said that even if we're going to be killed, we're not going to abandon Judaism. The other was that after everything was good, and after the victory of Purim, they still accepted the Torah upon themselves out of a free will and out of a yearning, out of a sense that they desperately wanted to be connected to Hashem because they felt bereft and crushed by the very fact of the Golus. B'yesh Lomer, we can say that so too, Shamuna, the faith that comes about because in the spiritual realms that the soul perceives godliness, which is ultimately faith from an external cause, because you as one entity are perceiving the incredible godliness in another. And by the way, if you look at it, most people seeking spirituality, most spiritual systems are about the individual receiving something wonderful and something good. It's about the individual's experience rather than truly becoming part of something greater and losing oneself. It's like when the willingness accept the Torah from the revelation from above. In other words, when there's a tremendous revelation, but it's not about the very essence of your soul, it's something you experience as a separate entity. So then then that overwhelms you. But when the overwhelming goes off, you go back to being who you were. Hence, for example, the golden calf. And that in the days of the Achashverosh, the Jews accepted of their own volition initiative. Because then the connection with godliness that stems from the essence of their soul was revealed. So it wasn't about that I, a particular Jew, received this tremendous revelation. It's that they got in touch by the crushing, in other words, by the sense that everything is missing until I can truly perceive and experience godliness. That comes from the essence of the soul, which says there's nothing but godliness. Why doesn't the rest of me see it? So when it comes from the essence of the soul, so then it's much deeper, because it's not something that's turned on and off. It's something it's not that the soul receives a revelation, it's the soul comes in touch with its essence. And this is an essential bond that reflects the essence of their being. So it's not you being acted upon, it's you discovering the essence of the Ein Sof that lies within your bit. And therefore they were prepared to give up their lives. But as we'll see, there's another level of this that is possible even with, so there's one, when you crush something, you reach its core. In this case, with the olive, you reach the oil, you break down the cells that hold the oil, and the oil comes out. In this case, by removing every benefit and to being Jewish, and by their very existence being threatened, in responding to that, this crushing, because every other thing, every other reason and explanation and benefit is lost if you're going to be destroyed. The one thing that remains is the essence of your connection to Hashem, which you don't want to break. So the crushing, the external pressure pushes you down to your core, and there's nothing left but the core. So we're saying that the Rebbe is saying that the same level of crushing is possible in a very comfortable goal. So now he's going to spend the rest of the Maimer explaining this. And in more specific way, we can explain that even with regards to the revelation of the soul's essence, there is a similarity between the two dimensions explained above. At the revelation of the essence of the soul that comes from Mesiras Nefesh, so now we're going to a very subtle point. In other words, there's the normal self, and then there's the self that comes out when they tell you that you have to abandon Judaism in order to live. So, in other words, then that takes over your normal self, the normal self-preservation self, the normal logical self. So the essence of the soul says, okay, rest of you, stand aside. All the things you care about are no longer important. But this becomes separate from your intellect and emotions. In other words, it's overpowering your intellect and emotion. You remain as you are. Now we're breaking through. This is coming through, and it pushes aside the normal intellect and emotions. Like you see, that we meet all kinds of people who had tremendous sacrifice for some matter of Judaism and so on. And for the rest of their lives, they're very ordinary people with all the foibles of ordinary people. On one hand, there's tremendous sacrifice, and there's nothing deeper than it. On the other hand, their ordinary self wasn't affected by it. So when there's no more pressure, they go back to being ordinary people with all the shortcomings and foibles. Why? For example, Kamo Sharon, now the Rebbe is going to specify this, something he saw among his own Chassidim. Kamo Sharon, we see in actuality in many people, they lived in the Soviet Union where there were tremendous decrees against Torah and mitzvahs. They had actual Mesiras Nefesh, actual self-sacrifice, literally putting their lives in danger, and willing to accept even execution for many, many years. However, when they come after countries like Israel, America, England, where they could observe the Torah and its mitzvahs, mitoch hachaver, from a sense of broadness without pressure, ein nikar behem mesiras nefesh shalom mikoda. We don't see so much. Yes, they're good religious Jews, but we don't see this mesiras nefesh they had before. We in other words, we don't see the same impetus to live their Judaism so intensely. They have the same failings that all of us have. Why? Because the mesiras nefesh, when you're threatened, and the only way to stay connected is to bring out this essence of the soul, it pushes aside the intellect and emotions, and you're running on mesiras nefesh time, on mesiras nefesh system. But when the pressure relaxes and the regular intellect and emotions snap back into place, you're the same person you were before. So even with mesiras nefesh, granted it has an effect on you, and granted, you're not going to dump the whole thing after putting your life on the line for it. But still, that level of intense commitment, in other words, that level of intense commitment where the desire for godliness fills your whole life isn't there. Why? Because the mesiras nefesh comes from a much deeper place in intellect and emotions and overpowers them, but doesn't transform them because it's of a different variety. Why? Why is that? Since mesiras nefesh reflects a person's inner godly core, it shouldn't be subject to change. Why? Because that which they stood in a state of literally putting their lives on the line for so many years is because the essence of the soul was revealed in a way that is beyond all their revealed powers. And therefore, it didn't change their revealed powers. It pushed them aside. It didn't change them. I mean, you see this even in ordinary people. In other words, not about even in people, any people, where it's not about the essence of the soul or anything, but in times of great emergency, they do things that they're not capable of doing in ordinary times. But it doesn't change them because you're calling out whether it's the fundamental instincts for self-preservation or that instinct to put yourself on the line for other people and so on. And we say that great sacrifice and heroism doesn't always translate into being a good, caring person the rest of your life. And all the more so when we're dealing with a matter of the essence of the soul. There we're dealing just with the ordinary human experience. When we're dealing with the essence of the neshama, it has the power to take a very ordinary person and raise them to a height of sacrifice for Judaism. But that, because that pushes aside the ordinary personality, the ordinary intellect, emotions, and personality structure, when the need for mesiras nefesh recedes, the ordinary self, whatever it is, however good it is, however deficient it is, snaps back into place.
We use Pinchas as an example.
Well, Pinchas was different because Pinchas was already on a high level and continued to be on a high level. In other words, we don't find, granted, he only put his life on the line at that point, but conceivably Pinchas was not on the same level after he put his life on the line as he was before. It's possible. I'm saying, but we have many other examples throughout history, of people who were willing to risk their lives in order to stay connected to Judaism, and like the people who didn't stay in Spain but who fled Spain at great risk to their lives because it was very uncertain, and many people did die during the expulsion.
Right.
But if you look at the records of the Amsterdam community, they had the same squabbles and foibles and shortcomings as anyone else. So this is something we see. Well, no, but there was no fundamental change in the revealed powers of the ordinary everyday self. Our intellect, emotion, personality, desires, jealousies, irritableness, and so on. Why? Because the granted that the essence of the soul is also the essence of the revealed powers, right? Because everything flows from the essence of the soul. So it would follow that if the essence of your soul acts on you, remember, the Rebbe's also make a point here, which isn't explicit, but it's obvious, very obvious point, that when a person engages in Mesiras Nefesh, you have to get your mind and body and emotions to go along. The body has to come along for the ride. You can't sacrifice your life without. So since the essence of the soul is the source of these qualities, and now these qualities are being co-opted by the essence of the soul, why doesn't it have a permanent effect? The Rebbe is challenging his Prishatzim and the Shamet Shalem because the essence of the soul is the essence of the powers. Nevertheless, the Ein Zeshayach L'Yonim has no direct effect on the nature of the revealed powers. In other words, it's the essential source of them, but it is a source that is so deep that it acts at a distance and doesn't normally affect them. So the revelation of the power of the essence of the soul co-opts them, but when it withdraws, it remains their source, but at a great distance. In other words, by way of example, if you look at the world we live in, so gravitation has a big effect on everyone and everything. But in a sense, it acts at a distance, which means to say is it affects everything, but isn't directly, it affects everything, but isn't directly built into everything. And there are many other examples of this. That this takes place, that the essence of the soul is the source of all the powers of the soul, but at a distance, in a concealed way. The way that another example is that the seed of a tree contains within it the entirety, of this huge tree that will grow. But once the tree exists in its full form, it takes a great deal of effort to see the pattern of the seed in it, with a great deal of of analysis and microscopes and so on. It's not so many things act at a distance. Even though it's their essence, it doesn't affect them themselves. That's the idea of an essence. It's the source acting at a distance, acting at many removes. And let's see to their form. In other words, the way a person thinks and feels, their particular, advantages and shortcomings and so on. That's a product of the way the intellect and emotions act on each other, the way the animal soul and godly soul interact. It has no bearing on the essence. And he gives the example of that someone who was fleeing from danger was able to squeeze through a small crack that once the danger was over, he could no longer squeeze through. Or the people, during Pearl Harbor, who picked up 500 pounds of ammunition and chucked it over the side so the ship wouldn't explode. They weren't able to lift 500 pounds, and some of them cracked vertebrae, but they found the strength to do that at the time. So again, even in the ordinary, the fundamental need for existence, which is the core of every living being, enables them to do things they ordinarily would not be able to do. So this is all about Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice. In other words, when an external force puts such pressure that the ordinary self could not resist it, but the essence says, no, I don't care. Even if it costs me my life, I'm going to do it. So that acts through obviously through the self, but doesn't change the fundamental self. Whereas, as we're going to see in a moment, that if a person can feel the sense of being crushed, the sense of desperation, the sense of being fundamentally adrift and missing something because they're not experiencing the revelation of the godliness that resonates within the essence of the soul. So that, perforce, as we'll see, must affect the external self and create a permanent change. And first of all, on a very basic level, since this is happening without an external pressure, it has to come from within. If it comes from within, you don't have anything external breaking the ordinary self, so the ordinary self has to be transformed from within. Second of all, this is not an acute thing, but an ongoing thing. It's not a momentary challenge. It's the need to create a sense of challenge, and the very fact of being in Galut. Again, even when exile is perfectly comfortable. In contrast, the revelation of the essence of the soul that is expressed in the feeling of being crushed and broken from being in exile makes even the revealed powers, Shigam Kokos Aguliyim Shalo, that seer, their form as they function within their ordinary reality, are one with the essence. In other words, the point the point over here is that if you feel crushed and broken from being exiled, why? So one of the points that I don't think is brought out so much explicitly in the Mimer is, how does one reach a sensibility of that the very fact of being in exile is a fundamental problem and something that crushes us and makes us sense that there's that we absolutely need to experience the revelation of godliness, unlike the external pressure of the Romans or the Crusaders or the KGB or whoever it may be. This has to come through the medium of the intellect and emotion. We're learning this Mimer, and the intellect and emotions have to, in other words, the whole self has to accept that this essence exists, and that this essence is fundamentally moved by the fact that even though everything is godly, we don't see it, we don't experience it. So one of the points that isn't emphasized here so much, but is important, is that the path, unlike the external pressure of the enemy, here the external pressure has to come from a reframing within our own intellectual and emotional self. So by definition, it's involved in the process. And therefore, when that essence is revealed, it has a pathway back through your intellect and emotion. It suffuses them, because here it is your intellect, it is your self, your intellect, your way of looking at the world that is your reframing of the way you look at the world that is awakening. So because the awakening comes from a process that involves the self, one's intellect and feelings and so on, it perforce will permeate them when you finally get there. And this is the meaning that are one with the essence. In other words, the revelation that is expressed to be crushed and broken and exiled makes even the revealed powers one with the essence. And again, the key idea over here is, the key point is this, that here you are involving the ordinary self in the first place. We don't have anyone holding a gun to our heads. It's where the sense of loss and bereftness, and that we're missing something terribly important that the essence of the soul feels, has to be got by doing something like learning this, by looking around at the world and understanding that we ought to perceive godliness. Even though that awakens something very powerful, the awakening is through the medium. It's like in Tanya talks about the inner love for Hashem that is revealed when a Jew is challenged to put their life on the line. But the Tanya says, well, if you understand that every disconnection from Hashem and every connection to Hashem is the same as the fundamental test of idolatry, so then you'll come to realize that this fundamental love and desire to connect to Hashem is really there all the time. How do you reveal it? Even though it's revealed, even though it's coming from the essence of the soul, it's not something you created. Nevertheless, it's revealed by a reframing of your understanding of the world, as discussed in time. And that's why if the being crushed comes from the sense that you're in exile, you don't perceive godliness, and you are able to poke, shall we say, the essence of the soul, that outflow is going to change you because the you was involved in creating that. In other words, the you is fully aware. In other words, in the case of a serious nefesh, there's the ordinary you, and then there's the pressure from outside that brings out the essence of the soul. Here, the pressure is being created as if it were within your intellect, within your emotions, and therefore, if you can get to it, then it's going to pass back through the same framework. So we explain that the fact that the essence of the soul and the seers is the framework, the form of the revealed powers appears two separate matters. Ulafi shagam etzem and neshama mugdaris together. Even the essence of the soul has a specific definition, and the definition of the essence of the soul, as we said, it acts at a distance. It's what is its nature? That it is above and beyond the ordinary self. But the now, however, the essence of the soul, not as so here the Rebbe is making a very subtle distinction between the essence of the soul as it is expressed in the person, and the essence of the soul in the root, which is one with the Ein Sof. Because there's two aspects. One, the Ein Sof is one. The other is that we have a particular expression of that within ourselves. So the particular expression is that it is a quality that is beyond all revealed reality. But what's its source? In Hashem's essence. And there, this simple transcendent and the framework of limited power is absolute unity. Very simple thing. Everything comes from the essence of the Ein Sof. So from the perspective of the Ein Sof itself, that expression of the Ein Sof and the essence of the soul and the revealed powers are all part of the same framework. And according to this, we can say that the luminary of the soul, through Mesiras Nefesh, is the essence of the neshama, as defined as a transcendent entity above the framework of our revealed powers. And the more the soul that's revealed through the feeling of being crushed in exile is a revelation, the essence of the neshama as it's rooted in God's essence. In other words, not only can it do as if it were the impossible, go out of its own structure and affect the revealed powers, it also means that the revealed powers have an effect on it. Because obviously, again, the only way we're going to get to this experience is through the mediation of the revealed powers. But the fact is that once the essence of the soul is revealed, as it exists in its source, which is what we reach by the sense of being crushed in Galut, why? And though we're going to talk about this more later, it's really very simple. Where there's an external force acting on you, that brings out the essence of the neshama as it exists within you. When it's coming from within, this means to say that one is getting in touch with the very essence of what the essence of the soul is. So that's not so there. It's not merely about the expression of the essence of the soul as it exists within us, but in its ultimate source, in Hashem's essence, where the impossible is possible. And therefore, that level, it can affect the revealed powers and cause a fundamental change. Because the Mesiras Nefesh we're looking for here is a fundamental change in which our whole being is consumed with this desire for connection to godliness that expresses itself, as we'll see, in everyday life. And why? Because when the impetus is coming from within the person themselves, so ultimately that reaches the very essence of the soul as it exists in its source. Whereas when it comes from an external power pressuring you, in other words, it's sufficient. The external power, the soul, essence of the soul as it exists within us as an individual, is enough to fight back against the external power. So that's all that gets triggered. But this much deeper effort of having the sense of brokenness, the sense of of desperation for godliness to be revealed needs to penetrate much deeper, because it's not enough. In other words, the external force is not enough. Here is something much deeper, and that penetrates the very essence of the soul as rooted in Hashem's essence. Because it's internal, it goes deeper than where it's coming from an external source. And that is what we shall conclude for this week. And Be'ezras Hashem, we will see you next week.
You know, I'm seeing it from a point of view of science, and
You go ahead.
it seems like this crushing could trigger a response similar to a fight or flight response within the neshama. So your soul is going through this, and what comes out at the end when you reach back to a homeostasis is that you've gained an experience, and this experience is now tethered you closer to God's essence, similar to doing a mitzvah. You tied a knot, which is
right. But what's the distinction? Where the experience is coming from an outside force, when you remove that outside force, so you fall back into the earlier framework. Right. Where it's entirely internal, so there's no external pressure creating the change in shape. It's coming from within, so it's that much deeper. Why? Because the only way to reach that is to trigger not the essence of the soul as it exists within the self, which is sufficient to deal with the pressure of the oppressor and make you willing to sacrifice your life. Here you have to reach back to the, when you're comfortable and so on, and to find the sense of yearning, you have to reach back to the essence of the soul as it's rooted in its source of the Ein Sof, not merely as it's expressed in the self. If when and if one can attain this, so this by definition, because it's coming from a place that is the source of everything and beyond all distinction, can affect the external self, even though logically it would seem there's nothing out there to really change the external self. It's an ordinary day in an ordinary world and so on. And that is what we're going to dwell on in the future sections. Thank you all for coming. Have a Veateah Tzeaveh, a good week, and God willing, we will see you next.
Thank you, Rabbi.